I didn't know my marriage was about to fracture in front of an entire ballroom of crystal chandeliers and fake smiles. Not until the exact second I realized my husband had intentionally left me off the invitation list. 8 years of marriage. 3 years of me watching him build his career with grit, discipline, and an almost frightening level of ambition. And suddenly, 3 weeks of distance, jargon, and a woman who came home looking like she'd been emotionally processed by a corporate machine. My name is Rachel. And the night my husband told his coworkers' champagne-soaked room that spouses weren't really expected was the night I learned how small he'd been trained to make me feel, without even realizing it himself. 3 weeks earlier, something shifted. Not infidelity, not coldness. Something worse. He became rehearsed. Every conversation turned into buzzwords. Every emotion translated into strategy. Every question I asked was answered with vague phrases like brand alignment and quarterly optics. He came home exhausted, but wired, like someone who'd just survived an 8-hour motivational sermon and didn't know how to turn their brain off anymore. His laptop never closed, his phone never stopped buzzing. And every time I asked what was going on, he smiled, tight, professional, and said everything was fine. I knew him too well to believe that. I've been married to this man for 8 years. I know the difference between tired and hollowed out. Then one evening, while pretending to look for my coffee mug in the kitchen, I overheard the sentence that cracked everything open. "There's this big gala my boss is throwing for the new downtown branch," he said into his phone, "and spouses aren't really expected. It's more of a networking thing." There was a pause. Then the words that still echo in my chest. "I don't want my wife there, and honestly, I'm not entirely sure why." That should have terrified both of us. It only terrified me. Because here's the truth, no one tells you about red flags in marriage. Sometimes they don't look like betrayal. Sometimes they look like embarrassment. And I realized something else in that quiet kitchen, holding a mug I'd been pretending to search for. If my own husband could erase me this easily from a room full of strangers, then something was already very wrong. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I didn't ask questions. I made a decision. If I wasn't welcome at his world's biggest night, I would show up anyway. Not as a wife begging for reassurance, but as the woman everyone in that room had been underestimating. Because I didn't just want to know why he didn't want me there. I wanted to see who he became when he thought I didn't exist. And that decision would detonate everything. I'm not the kind of woman who falls apart easily. I'm 35, and I've spent most of my adult life learning how to hold myself steady, through pressure, through expectations, through the quiet, invisible math women do every day just to keep life running smoothly. For the last 3 years, I've worked at the same company, starting as an analyst and clawing my way up to senior manager through pure hustle. No shortcuts, no favors, no pretty privilege, just long hours, sharper instincts, and the kind of discipline that makes people either respect you or resent you. I love my job because it felt earned. And I loved my marriage because for a long time, it felt like a safe place. My husband's name is Jason Hayes. He's always had that calm confidence, like someone who never needs to raise his voice to be taken seriously. He's charming without trying, and he has this ability to make people feel like they're the only person in the room when he talks to them. When we met, I was younger, hungrier, still proving myself. He was already established, but not in a flashy way. He didn't wear his success like a badge. He didn't brag. He never needed to. I remember the first time I saw him. It was at a charity event my friend dragged me to, a banquet room with bland chicken, cheap wine, and people pretending they cared about the cause so they could network. Jason wasn't the loudest man there, but he was the one people naturally drifted toward. Not because he demanded attention, because he carried something steady, like he knew where he was going, and the world just made room for him. We talked near the dessert table. I made a joke about the tiny mousse cups looking like food for rich ants, and he laughed, really laughed, like he wasn't performing. Then he asked me questions that weren't surface level. Not, "What do you do?" but, "Do you like it?" Not, "Where are you from?" but, "Do you miss it?" That was new to me. Most men I dated before Jason either wanted to impress me, compete with me, or flatten me into something easier to manage. Jason didn't. Jason made space. We dated for 2 years before we got married. And during those 2 years, I learned what it felt like to be with someone who wasn't threatened by ambition. When I was promoted, he celebrated me. When I worked late, he didn't sulk. When I came home drained, he didn't make it about himself. That's why I married him, because he felt like partnership, not possession. And yet, If I'm honest, there was always one thing about Jason that I didn't fully understand. He was private about his work. Not secretive in the suspicious way, more like compartmentalized. Like there was a door in his life he kept closed, not because he was hiding something, but because he didn't see the need to open it. Sometimes I'd ask, "How's work?" and he'd answer in broad strokes. "Busy. Good. Lots going on." I thought he was just the type of man who didn't bring office stress home. I admired that about him. I didn't realize it was also a way of controlling the narrative, because Jason never lied to me. He just didn't tell me everything, and that was fine until it wasn't. By the time I joined my company, we'd already been married for 5 years. I was proud of our life. We weren't flashy. We weren't the couple who posted staged photos with captions about grind culture and power moves. We had a quiet rhythm. Coffee in the morning, dinner together most nights. His hand on my lower back when we walked into a room, subtle, protective, familiar. And then 3 years ago, when I got the job at this company, I felt like I was stepping into a new chapter. This wasn't some small team where everyone knew everyone. This was corporate, structured, political. And Jason was proud of me. But I could tell he didn't fully understand the kind of pressure I was stepping into. Still, I made it work. I climbed fast. Not because someone helped me, but because I learned to outwork the noise. Which is exactly why what happened 3 weeks ago hit me so hard. Because I wasn't some fragile woman depending on a man's approval. I was a senior manager with a track record, a marriage built on trust, and a spine made of steel. So why did I suddenly feel like I was being quietly erased? And why did it feel like the person doing it was the man who promised he'd never make me small? Because the truth is, the distance didn't start on the night of the gala. It started in little moments, so subtle, I didn't name them until later. Like the first time he came home and used a word like optics to describe our relationship. Like the way he started checking his phone during dinner. Like the way his laughter became measured. As if someone had taught him how to speak without revealing anything real. And then there was Derek, Jason's boss, a man I'd heard about in passing. Not because Jason complained, Jason rarely complained, but because Derek was the type of name that carries a certain weight in a workplace. The kind of boss who thinks charisma is leadership. The kind of boss who believes respect is something you take, not something you earn. The kind of man who makes women like me work twice as hard just to prove we belong in the room. I had never met Derek, but I'd heard enough to know he was dangerous in a very specific way. Not physically, socially, professionally, emotionally. And when Jason started coming home acting like a corporate zombie, wired, distant, and rehearsed, I didn't think he's cheating. I thought someone is training him to speak differently, to think differently, to see his life, our marriage, through the lens of power. And in corporate culture, power games always have casualties. Usually, it's the person who's not in the room. That night in the kitchen, hearing him say he didn't want me at the gala, I realized I was about to become the casualty. Unless I showed up. Unless I made myself impossible to ignore. Once you notice the shift, you can't unsee it. Every interaction becomes a data point. Every silence starts to feel deliberate. After the night I overheard that phone call, I didn't confront Jason, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to understand what had changed before I reacted to it. And what changed wasn't his affection. It was his alignment. He still kissed my cheek when he came home, still asked how my day was, still slept beside me. But there was a thin layer of distance between us now, like glass. I could see him, I just couldn't reach him. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I'd brushed off before. He'd correct my phrasing. Not in an obvious way, just small rewrites. When I said, "My team's exhausted," he'd reply, "You mean morale is low." When I said, "Derek seems intense," he'd say, "He's just results-driven." Results-driven. That phrase came up a lot. So did image, perception, and not rocking the boat. One night over dinner, I casually mentioned how one of my coworkers had been passed over for promotion, despite outperforming everyone else. Jason nodded, distracted, scrolling through his phone. "Sometimes it's not about performance," he said. It's just performance, he said. "It's about positioning." That word again. Positioning. I put my fork down. "Since when do you talk like this?" I asked. He looked up, surprised, like he hadn't realized he was speaking out loud. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said carefully, "you used to talk about people. Now you talk about systems." He smiled, too quick. "I'm just learning how the game works." That sentence lodged itself in my chest, because I didn't remember agreeing to play a game. The real discomfort crept in when his friends started acting differently. Jason's work circle, the ones I'd met a handful of times at casual dinners, suddenly felt curated. When we ran into them at a bar one Friday, they barely acknowledged me. Not rudely, strategically. Their attention orbited Jason, pulling him into conversations that excluded me without ever explicitly doing so. One of them, Mark, I think, clapped Jason on the shoulder and said, "Big night coming up, man. Big optics." I was standing right there. Jason laughed, nervous. I smiled politely. Inside, something tightened. Later that night, as we walked home, I asked, "Do your coworkers not like me?" He stopped short. "What? No, of course not." "Then why do they act like I'm invisible?" He hesitated. Just half a second too long. "They're just focused on work." That's when I realized something important. Jason wasn't just distancing himself. He was being coached. Coached on what to say, how to present, what to prioritize. And I had a sinking feeling that I didn't fit into the version of him they were trying to build. The gala became the centerpiece of that discomfort. Every day it loomed larger. He talked about it constantly, about the venue, the guest list, the importance of being there early. Yet every time I asked about logistics, his answers were vague. One evening I asked directly, "So, should I book something special to wear?" He froze. Not visibly, but I felt it. "Oh, about that," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's more of a professional thing." I waited. "Spouses aren't really expected," he added quickly. "It's just networking." Networking. The word sounded like a door closing. I didn't argue. I didn't push. I just nodded. Because deep down I knew something worse than exclusion was happening. He wasn't protecting me from that world. He was protecting himself from being associated with me in it. And that realization hurt in a way I didn't have language for yet. The final seed was planted the morning after. Jason was getting ready for work, tying his tie in the mirror. I watched him from the doorway. He looked sharp, focused, distant. "You okay?" he asked, catching my reflection. "Yes," I said automatically. Then I added, "Are you?" He paused, then smiled. "I'm exactly where I need to be." That wasn't the man I married. The man I married used to say, "We'll figure it out together." This new version spoke like someone who'd been told success required isolation. That night, lying awake beside him, I stared at the ceiling and understood something terrifying. I wasn't being pushed out by accident. I was being edged out quietly, so quietly that if I protested, I'd look emotional, insecure, unsupportive, and I could already imagine the labels. She couldn't handle his growth. She wasn't aligned. She didn't understand the culture. No, I understood it perfectly, which is why I knew I couldn't confront it head on, because if I did, I'd lose before I even spoke. The only way to understand what was happening was to see it for myself, to walk into that room, to watch how Jason behaved when he thought I wasn't supposed to exist, and to see exactly who Derek was, not through office rumors, but through the way he treated a woman he assumed had no power. Friday evening arrived with the kind of calm that feels suspicious in hindsight. Jason left early, too early. "I need to help with setup," he said, already halfway out the door, adjusting his cufflinks like he was stepping into a different version of himself. I watched him go, standing in the hallway longer than necessary, listening to the sound of his footsteps fade down the stairs. He'd never volunteered to arrive early to anything in our entire marriage. Not birthdays, not holidays, not even our wedding. That alone told me everything I needed to know. I stood in our bedroom for a long time after he left. Then I opened my closet. Choosing what to wear felt symbolic, like deciding how much of myself I was willing to reveal to a room that hadn't planned for me. I didn't dress to impress. I dressed to belong. A charcoal dress, clean lines, structured, understated. The kind of outfit that doesn't ask for permission. I looked at my reflection and took a slow breath. "You're not crashing anything," I told myself. "You're attending your own marriage." The drive downtown gave me too much time to think. Was I crossing a line? Was this insecurity masquerading as curiosity? Was I about to humiliate myself? Then I remembered his voice in the kitchen. "I don't want my wife there." And my doubt hardened into resolve. The venue was impossible to miss. Glass facade, valet parking, light spilling onto the sidewalk like an invitation reserved for a specific kind of person. I parked, stepped out into the cool night air, and walked toward the entrance with steady confidence, heart pounding, posture calm. At the door, a man with a clipboard glanced up. "Name." "Rachel Hayes," I said. He scanned the list, paused, looked up again. I held his gaze. Then, without comment, he stepped aside. That was my first clue. Inside, the room was everything Jason had described. Crystal chandeliers, live band, champagne flowing like excess disguised as celebration. It was corporate theater at its finest. People clustered in practice formations, laughing too loudly, nodding too often, every interaction calibrated. The moment I stepped fully into the room, I felt it. That drop. Like the air shifted. Eyes turned. Not because I looked out of place, but because I wasn't expected. And then I saw Jason. Across the room. Laughing. Too loud. Too polished. Standing among his colleagues with his shoulders back, his smile measured, like he was auditioning for a role he desperately wanted to keep. For 1 second, I considered walking straight up to him. Then someone intercepted me. Derek. I recognized him immediately. Mid-40s, perfectly tailored suit, smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He approached with the confidence of a man who assumes every unknown woman is either decoration or inconvenience. "Ah," he said, extending his hand. "You must be Jason's wife." The emphasis on wife landed wrong. "Yes," I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, calculated. "Rachel." He smiled wider. "That's wonderful. Jason didn't mention you'd be joining us." I matched his smile. "He didn't invite me." The smallest flicker crossed his face. Surprise, then dismissal. "Well," he said smoothly, "this is more of a professional environment." There it was. The line. The quiet insult wrapped in etiquette. Before I could respond, he gestured toward Jason, who was now visibly aware of my presence. His smile froze. For a split second, I saw it. Panic, not fear. Embarrassment. He excused himself from his group and walked toward us, his expression settling into something carefully neutral. "Rachel," he said softly, like I was a complication. "What are you doing here?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. "I came to support you," I said. Derek laughed lightly. "That's admirable," he said, "but tonight's about optics." Optics. Again. Jason didn't correct him. He didn't say, "She belongs here." He didn't put a hand on my back. He just stood there, silent. That was the moment something inside me went still, because I realized this wasn't about misunderstanding. This was about permission. And he hadn't given me any. As the evening unfolded, it got worse. Derek made jokes at my expense, subtle enough to pass as harmless. Behind every successful man, support systems are important. Some partners prefer to stay home. Each comment landed like a small cut. Jason laughed nervously, never fully agreeing, never defending. Then came the toast. Derek clinked his glass, commanding attention. "Let's raise a glass," he said, "to ambition, and to the partners who understand when to stay in the background so greatness can shine." His eyes flicked toward me. The room laughed. Not real laughter. Obligatory. I felt heat rush to my face, but not humiliation. Clarity. I raised my glass slowly. The sound caught his attention. "And to leadership," I said calmly, my voice carrying, "that understands success isn't built on belittling the people closest to us." The laughter died instantly. Silence rippled outward. Derek's smile faltered. Jason stared at me, half shocked, half terrified. And in that quiet, glittering room, I felt the power shift. Because Derek had just underestimated me. Jason had just failed me. And neither of them realized yet how much that mistake was about to cost. The silence after my words felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had at home. It wasn't dramatic. No gasps, no shouting. Just that sharp collective pause, when people aren't sure whether they've just witnessed bravery or a career-ending mistake. Derek recovered first. Men like him always do. He chuckled, lifting his glass slightly, like I'd just made a quirky remark that wasn't worth unpacking. "Well said," he replied smoothly. "Support takes many forms." The room exhaled. Conversation resumed, carefully. But something had changed. I could feel it in the way people started glancing at me instead of through me. Jason leaned in close, his voice low and strained. "Rachel," he said, teeth clenched behind a smile, "we need to talk." "Later," I replied just as quietly. "You're busy networking." That word again. Networking. He straightened, jaw tight. For the rest of the evening, I became something else in that room. Not a guest. Not a spouse. A variable. I stood near the edge of conversations, observing. Watching Derek perform. Watching Jason shrink. And for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to fix anything. I wasn't smoothing edges or managing impressions. I was just watching. Derek worked the room like a politician, laughing too loudly, touching shoulders, inserting himself into every group. But now I noticed how often people glanced back at me afterward, like they were recalculating. Jason hovered near Derek most of the night, nodding, agreeing, staying close. Not because he admired him, because he feared losing his approval. That realization hurt more than any insult. At one point, Jason finally pulled me aside near the bar. His hand hovered near my elbow, unsure whether he was allowed to touch me. "You can't do this," he whispered. "Do what?" I asked calmly. "Make comments like that, not here." "Why?" I asked. "Because it's unprofessional, or because it embarrasses you?" His eyes flicked around nervously. "This matters, Rachel." I held his gaze. "So do I." He looked away first. That was the moment I understood something I'd been avoiding for weeks. Jason didn't want me erased. He wanted me contained, palatable, quiet, supportive in a way that never challenged his position. And Derek had taught him that. The shame didn't come all at once. It seeped in slowly. In the way people spoke to Jason after that, slightly more cautiously. In the way Derek stopped including him in private jokes. In the way Jason's posture subtly collapsed as the night went on. Around dessert, Derek made another pass by me. "So, Rachel," he said with that same patronizing warmth, "what do you do again?" The question was casual, but intentional. I smiled. "I manage teams," I said. "I build systems. I fix what leadership breaks." A couple of people nearby stifled smiles. Derek laughed too, but this time it sounded brittle. "Well," he said, "it's great that Jason has someone at home who's accomplished." At home. I didn't correct him. I didn't need to. Because for the first time all night, I wasn't reacting. I was assessing. And what I saw was a man whose power relied entirely on people believing he had it. As the event began winding down, Jason barely spoke. He looked exhausted, not energized like the nights before. When we finally left, walking side by side into the cool night air, the distance between us felt wider than the sidewalk. He didn't speak until we reached the car. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. "Tell you what?" I replied. "That you were going to challenge him." I laughed softly. "Jason," I said, "I didn't challenge anyone. I existed." He flinched. The drive home was silent. Not the comfortable kind. The kind where thoughts get louder. When we walked into our apartment, he dropped his keys on the counter and ran a hand through his hair. "That wasn't fair," he said finally. "You blindsided me." I turned to face him. "You blindsided me first," I said calmly, "when you decided I was something to hide." He opened his mouth, closed it, then said, "You don't understand how this works." I felt something inside me harden. "No," I said, "I understand exactly how it works. I just didn't realize you were willing to play along." He looked at me like I'd slapped him. And in that moment, neither of us knew yet that the real damage hadn't even begun. Because what we'd just witnessed wasn't the end of the conflict. It was only the beginning. The night had exposed the crack. Now it was about to split wide open. The fallout didn't wait for morning. It began the moment Jason's phone buzzed on the nightstand, again and again and again. He didn't answer. He stared at the screen like it was a live wire. "What?" I asked quietly. "Nothing," he said too fast. "Work." I turned away, not because I believed him, but because I already knew. By Monday, the atmosphere shifted from awkward to hostile. Jason came home tense, jaw clenched, shoulders tight, like he'd been bracing for impact all day. "They're talking," he said finally, dropping his bag by the door. "Who?" I asked. "Everyone." I waited. "They think you crossed a line," he continued. "That you embarrassed Derek." I laughed once, short, disbelieving. "I didn't embarrass him," I said. "He embarrassed himself." "That's not how they see it." Of course it wasn't. Because in corporate ecosystems like that, power is protected first. Truth comes later, if at all. Over the next few days, the pressure escalated. Jason's coworkers stopped inviting him to impromptu meetings. Derek became colder. Short replies, delayed approvals, passive-aggressive comments during calls. And somehow, the blame shifted toward me. Jason didn't say it outright at first, but it crept into his words. "If you hadn't said anything, if you'd just trusted me, if you'd stayed home like I asked." One night, after a particularly long silence at dinner, he finally snapped. "You made me look weak," he said. The words landed hard. I put my fork down slowly. "No," I replied. "You felt weak. That's not the same thing." His face flushed. "They don't respect me anymore." I looked at him, really looked. "They didn't respect you before," I said gently. "They just needed you." That was when the argument started. Not explosive. Strategic. Jason began repeating phrases that didn't sound like his own. "You don't understand office politics. You're emotional about this. You're jeopardizing my position." Emotional. There it was. the word men reach for when they don't want to confront discomfort. I felt the loneliness sink in, not because he disagreed with me, but because he'd stopped seeing me as an equal. Meanwhile, Derek didn't stop. He started excluding Jason openly, assigning him tasks beneath his role, making jokes during meetings. Once, during a team call, Derek said, "Let's keep personal opinions out of professional spaces, shall we?" Jason came home pale, silent, and that's when his family entered the picture. His sister called first. "I heard you caused a scene," she said flatly. His mother followed. "Jason's worked too hard for this," she scolded. "You should apologize. Apologize. For existing in a room I was married into. For refusing to be invisible." I realized then that this wasn't just about Derek. This was about a system that trained men to believe their wives were liabilities once ambition entered the room. Jason didn't defend me. Not to them. Not to Derek. Not to himself. And the more he tried to regain control at work, the more he lost it at home. He became short-tempered, dismissive, started sleeping with his phone under his pillow. One evening I overheard him on a call, his voice low, urgent. "I know," he said. "I'll fix it." Fix it. Like I was a problem to be managed. That night, lying awake beside him, I felt the shift inside me complete. The hurt gave way to something colder, clearer. Because I understood now. I wasn't fighting Derek. I was fighting the version of my husband that believed power required my silence. And the more they pushed, the more I realized I wasn't willing to bend. There's a moment in every unraveling where you stop asking why and start asking how you let it get this far. For me, it came on a Wednesday night. Quiet, ordinary, devastating in its simplicity. Jason came home late. Not work ran long late. Avoidance late. He didn't kiss me when he walked in. Didn't take off his jacket. Didn't sit. He stood in the doorway like someone preparing to deliver bad news. "They want me to make a statement," he said. I looked up from the couch. "A statement about what?" "About Friday. About distancing myself from what happened." The word distancing landed like a bruise. "From me," I said. He didn't deny it. "They think it would help," he added quickly. "Just something vague, professional boundaries, clarifying expectations." Clarifying expectations. I waited for the rest. For the part where he said he refused. It didn't come. "So," I said slowly, "you're asking permission." He rubbed his temples. "I'm asking for your understanding." That was the moment something inside me broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. I stood up. "Jason," I said, my voice steady, "do you know what it feels like to watch the person you trusted most negotiate your worth with people who don't even know you?" He looked at me, eyes red. "This isn't fair," he said. "You don't know what it's like in that office right now." I nodded. "You're right," I said. "I don't. Because when it got uncomfortable, I didn't sell you out to survive." Silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. "I didn't marry you to become collateral damage," I continued, "and I didn't work this hard on my own life to be asked to disappear so yours looks cleaner." His voice cracked. "I'm scared," he admitted. "If I lose this, I don't know what happens next." That was the most honest thing he'd said in weeks. And still, he didn't choose me. He just stood there, caught between fear and loyalty, unable to commit to either. That night, he slept on the couch. Not because we agreed to it, because neither of us knew how to lie next to each other anymore. I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the city outside, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Alone. Not physically. Emotionally. I replayed the gala in my head. The laughter. The toast. The way Jason looked at me like I was a complication instead of his wife. And then I did something I hadn't done since I was young and scared and didn't know how to ask for help. I cried. Quietly, carefully. So he wouldn't hear. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want to give him one more thing to manage. By morning, something had changed. The tears were gone. In their place was a clarity so sharp it scared me. I couldn't control Derek. I couldn't control the office. I couldn't even control Jason's fear. But I could control one thing. What I was willing to accept. And I realized, lying there in the aftermath of everything I'd swallowed for the sake of peace, that I had reached the point where staying silent hurt more than standing alone. The turning point didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived with a phone call. I was at work, sitting in a glass-walled conference room, reviewing performance reports with my team, when my phone vibrated softly against the table. "Michelle." I almost ignored it. Almost. Something told me not to. "Give me 5 minutes," I told my team, stepping into the hallway. Michelle's voice was calm, but weighted. "Rachel," she said, I need you to hear this from me before it turns into gossip. My chest tightened. Hear what? There's an internal audit underway, she said. Unofficial, quiet, board level. I leaned against the wall. About Derek? A pause. Yes. The air left my lungs in a slow exhale. She continued carefully. There have been complaints, repeated ones. Not just about leadership style, about misuse of company funds, intimidation, retaliation. My mind flashed back to the gala. The champagne, the excess, the way Derek spoke like the company was an extension of his ego. And Jason? I asked. Another pause. He's been flagged as adjacent, Michelle said gently. Not complicit, but visible. Visible. That word again. He's scared, I said quietly. I know, Michelle replied, but fear doesn't excuse silence forever. I closed my eyes. What do you need from me? Nothing, she said. I just wanted you to understand something. What? You weren't wrong, she said. And you weren't inappropriate. You were inconvenient. The call ended, and I stood there longer than necessary, letting the truth settle. The system hadn't cracked because I spoke. It cracked because it was already broken. That night, Jason came home subdued. Not angry, not defensive. Just tired. They're investigating Derek, he said quietly. I know, I replied. He looked at me, startled. How? Because people talk, I said, especially when they feel safe. He sat down slowly. I think I was protecting the wrong thing, he admitted. I didn't rush to comfort him. I waited. I thought if I played along, I could control the damage, he continued, but all I did was lose myself. I studied his face. And me? I asked. His voice broke. I lost you first. That was the moment the power shifted. Not because I won, but because I stopped begging to be chosen. I'm not asking you to burn your career down, I said calmly. I'm asking you to decide who you are when it matters. He nodded, eyes wet. I won't make the statement, he said. Whatever happens, I won't distance myself from you. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And for the first time since the gala, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief. Alignment. Because I understood now. The turning point wasn't Derek's downfall. It was the moment I reclaimed my voice, without apology. And whether Jason could meet me there was the last unanswered question. The fallout didn't explode. It settled. Like ash after a fire, soft, inescapable, coating everything Derek had touched. By Monday morning, the office felt different. Jason told me the energy shifted the second people walked in. Conversations stopped when managers passed. Doors closed more often. Calendars quietly cleared. Derek wasn't there. No email, no explanation, just absence. By noon, the rumors were no longer whispers. The board had stepped in. The audit was real. Expense reports didn't add up. Complaints had been documented for months. People started connecting dots they'd been trained not to see. The gala, its excess, its tone, its arrogance, was suddenly being reinterpreted as evidence, not celebration. And Derek's name began to carry a different weight. Jason came home early that day. I think he's done, he said quietly. Not fired yet, but finished. He didn't sound triumphant. He sounded hollow. Because when systems fall, they take pieces of everyone with them. By Tuesday, the resignation email hit inboxes. Short, polished, buzzword heavy. It used phrases like mutual decision, strategic realignment, and grateful for the opportunity. No apology, no accountability. But everyone knew. Break rooms filled, phones buzzed. People reread the email like it might change. Jason forwarded it to me with a single line. It's over. At work, I became something else. Not a target, not a threat, a reference point. People looked at me differently, not with suspicion, but with recalibration. A few colleagues pulled me aside. I'm glad you said something, one whispered. Another said, we needed that. No one said, I'm sorry. But they didn't have to, because the truth had finally outrun the narrative. Jason's family went quiet. His mother didn't call. His sister sent a brief text. Guess we misjudged things. No apology. But no accusations either. Sometimes silence is the closest thing to accountability people are capable of. Michelle was named interim CEO by Thursday. Her first move was a company-wide email about restoring trust, transparency, and respect. It was the kind of message that should have been sent years ago. Jason showed it to me that night. I should have listened to you sooner, he said. I didn't respond right away. Because this part mattered. Not the victory. The aftermath. Jason, I said finally, this wasn't about Derek, or the company, or the gala. He nodded. I know, he said. It was about whether I could exist fully beside you, I continued. Not behind you, not quietly, not conditionally. He swallowed. I forgot that, he admitted. Somewhere along the way, I let fear convince me I had to earn my place by shrinking yours. That sentence cost him something. I could tell, and it mattered. Because accountability that comes easy doesn't mean much. The real consequences weren't public. They were private. Jason stopped checking his phone at dinner, stopped filtering his words, stopped treating our marriage like a liability to be managed. At work, he was quieter, but stronger. Not chasing approval, not orbiting power, just doing his job. And for the first time in weeks, the tension in our home softened. Not erased, but honest. The fallout didn't ruin us, but it did leave a mark. One we would always remember. Some endings don't feel like triumph. They feel like exhale, the kind that comes after holding your breath for too long, when your body doesn't even realize how tense it's been until the release finally arrives. A few weeks after everything settled, Jason and I sat on our couch on a quiet Sunday morning, sunlight spilling across the floor, coffee going cold in our mugs. No phones, no deadlines, no crisis. Just us. I've been thinking, he said. I waited. I built my confidence on being needed, he continued, and somewhere along the way, I started mistaking that for being respected. I nodded. That's a dangerous trait, I said softly. He reached for my hand. I don't ever want you to feel like you have to make yourself smaller so I can feel bigger. I looked at him, really looked. Not the man from the gala, not the man from the arguments, but the one who was finally standing still enough to see himself clearly. I won't, I said, not again. And that was the boundary. Not shouted. Not dramatic, unmovable. The office moved on. Stories became anecdotes. Derek became a cautionary tale. Michelle rebuilt what arrogance had fractured. And I kept working, kept leading, kept speaking, even when it was uncomfortable. Because I learned something through all of this that I wish I'd known earlier. You don't lose power by showing up where you're unwanted. You gain clarity. You learn who's invested in your silence. You learn who benefits from you staying in the background. And you learn, quickly, who's willing to stand beside you when the room gets cold. I didn't crash a party. I walked into a truth, one that forced everyone, including my husband, to decide what mattered more. Status, or integrity, fear, or partnership. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need applause. I needed alignment. And I found it, not because the system changed overnight, but because I refused to disappear to make someone else comfortable. If there's one lesson I'd leave with anyone listening, it's this. Never let anyone convince you that love requires invisibility. If the room can't handle your presence, that's not your shame to carry. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up,